Hey gang, and welcome back. Just a reminder, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com. You'll get 10% off orders over $10 and help with the channel at the same time. Welcome back to trial number 2 of the new setup for the new games. Unfortunately, this game is a little bit shaky due to the tripod being next to the table and the table being shaken a little bit, but don't worry, this will be resolved in future games. This week, Tim is playing his Prime Speaker Zegana deck and keeps a hand with Sylvan Scrying, Thousand Winds, Plasm Capture, Opal Palace, Simic Signet, Forest, and Thornwood Falls. Ryan, who's new to the channel, is playing Karador and keeps a hand with Woodfall Primus, Siege Rhino, Kadama's Reach, Life from the Loam, Murmuring Bosque, Wooded Foothills, and Savannah. I am playing my new Trostani deck and keep a hand with Farhaven Elf, Command Tower, Greater Good, Selesnya Sanctuary, Sundering Growth, Forest, and Beast Within. Last but not least, Ben is back and he's playing his Queen Marchesa deck and he keeps a hand with Plains, Mountain, Canyon Slough, Command Tower, Even Mind Sensor, Approach of the Second Sun, and Kalitas, Trader of Get. Tim wins the die roll and starts us off. Tim plays a Thornwood Falls, gaining 1 and passes. Ben plays a Temple of Silence, scrying and keeping it on top. I play a Forest and pass my turn. Ryan plays a Wooded Foothills and passes. Tim plays an Island and casts a Simic Signet. Ben plays a Canyon Slough and passes. I play a Selesnya Sanctuary, bouncing my forest back to my hand. At the end of my turn, I discard a Terracodon and pass. And Ryan cracks his Wooded Foothills to find an overgrown tomb, taking 1. Ryan plays a Murmuring Bosque, revealing a Woodfall Primus to have it come into play untapped. He then casts Life from the Loam, targeting his Wooded Foothills, and passes. Tim plays an Opal Palace for his land for turn, and pays 3 to cast a Morph creature. Ben plays a Command Tower for his turn, and passes. I play a Forest and cast a Farhaven Elf to find a Plains. On Ryan's draw step, he dredges back Life from the Loam, revealing his top 3 cards. Solemn Simulacrum, a Forest, and Viscera. He replays his Wooded Foothills and cracks it, taking another 1 to find a Temple Garden. Ryan then recasts Life to get back the 2 lands in his graveyard and passes turn. Tim plays a Forest for his turn and casts a Wood Elves. He then swings his Morph creature at Ryan for 2 before going to find his land. Ben plays a Mountain for his turn and casts Blind Obedience. I play a Command Tower and pay 2 green and 2 white to cast Trostani and cheat a little bit because I don't have her come into play tapped. Ryan dredges once more, hitting some spells this time to return his Life from the Loam. Ryan replays Wooded Foothills and cracks it to find a land while dropping his Sylvan Library before searching. He finds a Forest and Ryan recasts Life to bring back his fetch. Tim pays 2 on his turn to cast a Sylvan Scrying to go and find Makokoro, Center of the Sea, which he plays for his land. Tim then swings the Morph and Wood Elves at Ryan for 3 and passes turn. Ben plays a Plains and casts a Cartel Aristocrats in his main phase. I play a Forest for my turn and pay 2 to cast Rampant Growth to find another basic. I then cast Sundering Growth in the library and swing my Trostani and my Elves at Ryan. Ryan dredges 3 again to return life to his hand before replaying his Wooded Foothills. Ryan then casts the old Scourge of Standard, Siege Rhino, and drains everyone for 3 while gaining 3. At the end of Ryan's turn, Tim makes nice with everyone by using Makokoro to give everyone a draw. Tim casts a Kadama's Reach in his main phase to find 2 basics. He puts an island onto the field and a Forest into his hand. He then plays the Forest as his land for turn and swings 3 at Ryan again. Ben plays a Plains and casts Queen Marchesa. He gains the Monarch token and draws at the end of his turn. I play a Forest and pay 4 to cast Nylea. She doesn't come in as a creature, so I'm pretty sure I did it correctly by having her come and play untapped. I then cast Greater Good and move to combat. I swing Trostani at Tim for 2 and pass my turn. At the end of my turn, Ryan cracks his Wooded Foothill to go and find a Forest. Ryan also casts Kadama's Reach in his main phase to put a Swamp onto the field and a Plains into his hand. He then plays the Plains, and we see the return of Life from the Loam to return 3 lands from Ryan's graveyard to his hand. Ryan then has to discard down to 7, and Tim has everyone draw once more. Ryan decides to dredge Life from the Loam and flips over more cards before dumping some lands. Tim draws for turn and passes. Ben plays a Swamp and casts Mogus, God of Slaughter. Ben then moves to his end of turn, drawing a card from being the Monarch and discarding a card. I take 2 from my upkeep from Mogus and play a Grey Pelt Refuge, gaining 1. I then pay 5 in my main phase to cast Karmic Guide, which Tim sends to the bottom of my library with a Hinder. Moving to combat, I get back at Tim a little bit by swinging Nylea and Trostani at him for 8. Tim stops Nylea with a Wood Elves, which logistically makes little sense, and takes 2 from Trostani. Ryan lets his Rhino die for Mogus on his upkeep before drawing for his turn. He plays a Savannah and casts a Golgari Thug. Ryan then casts Karador for only 4, but Tim is done with being friendly and uses Plasm Capture to counter it. Ryan then casts Life from the Loam once more to get back 3 lands and passes turn. Tim loses 2 on his upkeep from Mogus before he decides to make 4 green and 4 blue from his Plasm Capture in his main phase. He uses 2 green to cast Nature's Lore. He grabs a forest and uses the rest of his floating mana and some of his lands to cast Prime Speaker Zegana, making sure to tap his Opal Palace to give her an extra counter. She comes in with 3 counters and Tim draws 4 cards. Tim then moves to combat and swings his Morph at Ryan because it's worked so well for him so far. Tim then has to discard down to 7 and passes to Ben. Ben plays a Plains and casts Kalitas, Trader of Get. At the end of his turn, he draws a card from Monarch and passes. I lose another 2 on my upkeep because let's face it, I'm going to get it back, and pay 6 to cast Ulvenwald Hydra in my main phase. I resolve my Hydra trigger first, finding a land before gaining 9 from Trostani's trigger. I grab a Rogue's Passage with the Hydra trigger, and I then move to combat, swinging Nylea at Ben. Ben chumps with his own god, and I realize how silly that combat step was. Ryan loses 2 on his upkeep and dredges his life again and plays a Canopy Vista. We then see life from the loam again, and I'm starting to feel like a broken record. He grabs 3 lands and passes turn. At the end of turn, Tim has the table draw a card, and Ryan dredges once more. Ryan then discards down to 7 and passes. Tim also loses 2 on his upkeep to Mogus, and he then plays a Yavimaya Coast and casts Altered Ego but pays nothing for X. He has it come into play as a copy of Zegana, and Tim sacrifices the original so that the copy comes in with 4 counters this time, and Tim draws 5. Tim then casts Skyshroud Claim, and Ben flashes in Aven Mindsensor to only let Tim look at the top 4. Tim stops this with a counterspell though, and goes to find his 2 forest cards. At the end of turn, I cast Beast Within to destroy Kalitas. Ben plays a Bajuka Bog as his land for turn, targeting Ryan. Ben then casts Shieldred, extorting it and draining us all for 1 while gaining 3. Ben then passes turn, and at the end of his turn, I sacrifice my Ulvenwald Hydra to Greater Good, drawing 9 and discarding 3. I take 2 on my upkeep, and I play a forest before casting Blade of Selves. I realize I had to sacrifice a creature, and bin Farhaven Elves. I then pay 3 to cast Wood Elves, gaining 1 life as it enters to go and find Temple Garden, taking 2 to have it come into play untapped. I then pay 4 to equip Trostani with the blade, and move to combat. I swing Trostani at Ryan, and the myriad triggers occur. This has 2 copies of Trostani hitting the field. The legendary rule has to be resolved first, but I do get their triggers. I gain 20 life from the swing, as the 2 tokens only see each other, gaining me 5, while my original sees both and gains me 10. I have the 2 token copies die, and Ryan chumps with his Golgari Thug and puts it on top of his library. Ryan takes 2 on his upkeep and passes turn, discarding his Golgari Thug at the end of turn. Tim loses 2 on his upkeep and sacrifices his Morph creature. Tim then casts Devastation Tide in his main phase. I respond by sacrificing Nylea to Greater Good, drawing 6 and pitching 3. Tim then recasts his Simic Signet and casts Eternal Witness, returning Nature's Lore. Tim then casts the Lore to find a forest and passes to Ben. Ben plays a Nomad Outpost for his land for turn and brings back Blind Obedience. He then casts Queen Marchesa, and finally a new spell, Hidden Stockpile. Ben then draws at the end of his turn and discards down to 7. I recast Trostani for my turn and forget she comes into play tapped. I follow up by dropping in a Maria Shepherd, gaining 4 life. I then play a Plains and get the Shepherd trigger, bringing back my Ulvenwald Hydra. I ordered the Hydra and Trostani in the same way, with the land tutoring resolving first, and I grab Reliquary Tower before gaining 13 life. I then remember my creatures come into play tapped like a good boy, and pass my turn. Ryan dredges his Golgari Thug and plays a Scrubland for his land for turn. Ryan then hardcasts Karador for the full costs, and casts Eileen from his graveyard. Tim reminds Ryan that his creatures should be tapped before hitting Ryan's Karador with a Beast Within. Tim casts a Heartbeat of Spring in his main phase and recasts Zegana using his Opal Palace. With Zegana on the stack, I cast Path to Exile targeting Tim's Eternal Witness, hoping to deny Tim a few cards. Tim lets the spell resolve, but either forgets or doesn't bother searching. Zegana hits the field and draws 3 cards. Tim then casts Phyrexian Metamorph, who resolves and comes in as a copy of Zegana. This copy of Zegana gains 3 counters and Tim draws 4. Tim then plays a Reliquary Tower and casts Garruk Wildspeaker, upticking his walker to untap 2 lands. Tim then wipes away his Heartbeat of Spring to deny everyone else the double mana and passes his turn. Ben casts a Skullclamp in his main phase and casts a Dark Petition but without spell mastery. Ben then casts an Ophiomancer and extorts it. On my upkeep, Ben gets a Snake from his Ophiomancer trigger, and I then cast Mirari's Wake in my main phase, and when it resolves, I recast Blade of Selves. I then pay to equip the blade onto the Hydra and move to combat. I declare I'm swinging my Hydra at Tim, and Myriad triggers, putting 2 tokens into the battlefield, 1 for Ryan and 1 for Ben. I resolve the Hydra triggers first, grabbing a forest and then a Plains. The Plains triggers and brings back Nylea, who enters the battlefield as a creature, gaining me another Trostani trigger. I gain 6 life from Nylea, and then 32 from the 2 Ulvenwald Hydra tokens. We then move to declare blocks, and everyone decides to just take the hit. Before the end of combat though, I populate one of the Hydra tokens with Trostani, who grabs another Plains, and Ben points out that I missed the Amira trigger from the forest. I gain another 17 life from this Hydra, and bring back Rampaging Velos, gaining another 7 life. I then pass to Ryan, and we remember that I should be the Monarch, and I draw a card. Ryan dredges 5 for a Stinkweed Imp, and plays a Forest. Ryan then casts the Imp and the Golgari Thug before passing to Tim. Tim draws for turn, and recasts his Heartbeat of Spring in his main phase. He then casts Dictate of Karametra, tripling his mana-producing ability of his lands, and I know the end is nigh. Tim then uptakes Garruk to untap 2 lands, and casts Altered Ego where X is 9. I cast an Unexpectedly Absent where X is 2, targeting Tim's Metamorph Zegana, but Tim dissipates it easily by tapping only 1 island. The Ego resolves, and I'll give you one guess what he's having it come in as a copy of. Another copy of Zegana hits the field this time, drawing Tim 14 cards. Tim then plays Temple of the False God, and Tim casts Spitting Image, copying his Altered Ego'd Zegana. Tim then draws 15 cards, before casting Turnabout to untap all of his lands, and Ryan responds by sacrificing his 3 creatures to Aili, gaining 6 life total. This doesn't phase Tim though, as he casts a Biovisionary, and with about 1 billion mana and a handful of lands to discard to retrace the Splitting Image, he creates 4 copies of the Human Wizard, and passes his turn to win the game. Game review time. So first and foremost, I'm happier with this shot than I was on Monday's game, and I've actually gotten even better with how I shoot the games, so look forward to that for the following weeks. I've also experimented with some of the white space, and I've left the cards in the middle of the screen as you saw, so let me know if you like that or dislike it. In terms of gameplay, I think I definitely could have played Trostani better, but this is one of the first few times where I actually got to test her out. As you could see, being able to make token copies of creatures that typically wouldn't be tokens is pretty fun. The other games I've recorded with Trostani since this have also showcased it really well. I think a big mistake on my part was the turn where I swung with the Ulvenwald Hydra and made 2 copies of it to attack everyone else. I should have sacrificed them to greater good to go deeper into my library and hopefully find more answers. I would have been going almost 30 cards deep into my library and presumably would have found Aetherflux Reservoir, which I could have kept on the field as a Rattlesnake and killed someone should I need to. Ryan unfortunately had a really good engine going, but he didn't seem to be able to get there since Tim and everyone else were stopping him from doing anything. He was able to dredge quite a bit, but then got hit by that unfortunate Bajuka Bog, which is probably what kept him in line anyway. Ben's Queen Marchesa deck seemed to be playing like a stacks deck, trying to grind value out for every turn. Unfortunately, he mentioned to me after the game that he drew quite poorly and wasn't really able to interact with anyone outside of Blind Obedience and Mogus. The last couple of Thursdays, Tim has been talking about his Prime Speaker Zegana deck, and I know that a lot of people have been requesting her, and I've never actually played against one, so it was a real treat to see on camera. Biovisionary was always a cool card that I thought was a fun build around me card, but I never really had the inclination to make it, so it was great to be able to see Tim take it into action and do some sweet stuff with it. Sure, Tim did win through combo, and I'm sure that's going to bother some people, but let's face it, I played incredibly fast and loose with my removal early on, and I should have kept at least 1 piece just in case. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in part by support from my Patreons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit my Patreon link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.